On this episode of this show, I have with me Laura Guerin. She is head of data and data science at Bevi, and we're going to be talking about building net new data capabilities. So we're going to talk about what it's like at the beginning when you're doing that ideation process, the roadmap building, talking to stakeholders, making sure you're actually getting to what they want, and how are you going to get them to invest? Because obviously investing in data is going to take money and time, and startups are sensitive to sometimes both. We'll ask her how she navigates that. We're also going to talk about hiring and generalists versus specialists, and got a hopeful couple other things in there as well with you, Laura, but thanks for the time.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, before we start, Bevi, what do you guys do?
So Bevi is a commercial grade smart bottleless water dispenser. So you can tailor your beverage, you can pick still, sparkling, hot, cold, lots of different flavor choices. There's enhancements if you want to add vitamins or electrolytes. So it's really a customized drinking experience.
Fantastic. All right, so we're going to be talking about this episode around building net new data capabilities. And I think this is applicable whether you're at a startup or a bigger company, because sometimes you're going to need new data capabilities. Doesn't mean you can't have that at different size companies. I guess let's start off at the beginning. When you are being hired to build a data team, even through the interview process, they're going to ask you about your thoughts, your ideas, how you're going to go about doing that, how you're going to prioritize. And I think obviously you can have those, statements and you can paint that vision. But when you get in and you need to actually start rolling up the sleeves to start building, that initial stakeholder piece and making sure you're getting the right inputs and making sure you're collecting all that right information to go back and build your plan. Talk to us a little bit about that process and how you've seen it work since you've done this a few times.
Absolutely. I think data on its own is not typically a priority. It's more about the action or the impact that comes out of the data. So figuring out how data and analytics is going to support the overall business strategic priorities, I think is key. So talking with the executive leadership team to understand what are the priorities of the business, and then secondarily, how can data and analytics help enable or accelerate that? A listening tour is a great way to start. Be a sponge. Have the right list of stakeholders to talk to. AI is very helpful with this to record and take notes and help synthesize and generate a SWOT analysis of what are your internal and external strengths and opportunity areas. From there, those two pieces together start to paint the picture of where should we prioritize? What are the 2 or 3 things that we should look to do as a data and analytics team?
Absolutely. And I guess as you're going through, I joke, I go, there's always this discussion of you want to paint the long-term plan. Here's what data is going to come and do for you. These are all things. And then we all know there's a ton more plumbing in data than we ever talk to stakeholders about. And I think that's interesting because sometimes they're like, okay, well, short-term is what we're going to do. And that's how we're trying to bridge the gap of telling them there's a lot we need to do just to get you a simple piece of reporting even. That plumbing, now on the flip side, there's a question here. On the flip side, engineering, software engineering, it's kind of known there's a lot of plumbing and legwork and coding that has to go into ship. In data, I don't know if that's as well understood by the stakeholders, or as data leaders, we try to minimize that because we do know that there's a pressure to deliver. So, I mean, there's a convoluted question in there, but I'll let you kind of unpack that a little for us.
It has definitely been my experience. There's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes that sometimes is not realized by stakeholders on the outside. I have found, for better or worse, that starting with the end deliverable of what's ultimately the goal of what we want to build. And how can we quickly prototype or build some sort of MVP? That does usually mean I'm rolling up my sleeves and I'm doing things manually and there's some copy pasting involved. It's not a pretty process for how the sausage is made, but it starts to create that end output, that value add to the business to say, is this really what you wanted or not? And is this going to help move the needle? And if the answer is yes, then we start having that conversation about, okay, how do we make it scalable and repeatable and actually build that piping in the back end? And so there's an education component to doing that, but it's easier to sell after they've already seen the end result.
Yeah, and it's interesting because sometimes I think about, you know, what software engineers deliver to the org, and it's code that eventually ships. People are excited. They knew it takes time. Most of the time, I'd say features don't expire in terms of what people wanted. Like if we needed this type of functionality, we need it. We'll wait for it. But in data, we need information. You need it very quickly because sometimes if you need to make a decision, time is very important. And I guess when we start looking at those critical factors of time, and you're thinking about, you mentioned early on the investment in data, it sometimes doesn't necessarily fit what we hear and then what we see. Like to get to that time, we need maybe more people, we need more, investment, we need all those things to kind of help us deliver faster, whatever that is. When you look at that and you're talking to executive stakeholders, and now with AI, there's a whole different wrinkle in that, right? Because everyone now thinks AI can do a lot of these things, but then there's a lot more, and it's a lot more complicated than it was just to deliver reporting. So talk to us a little bit about when we're talking about delivering more advanced data solutions and going back to this expectation. Has that changed? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse?
With the inclusion of AI, I think the discussions just shift a little bit. And so instead of the priorities being more about data or analytics or some of the insights, there's just another item on that list where how can we use AI to help accelerate? So right now we've got a work stream around AI at Bevi and how can we use AI to help accelerate the business? We started with use cases. There's a lot of talk and a lot of terminology being thrown around of AI can solve everything. It's the silver bullet. Starting with a use case of what are we actually trying to solve? What is the problem? Hugely helpful to sort of narrow the focus into what's really important. And then let's talk about how, because very often we don't need AI to solve it. And that's okay. But in other instances, AI is incredibly useful. So we have two big projects that we're focused on right now that will leverage AI to help accelerate the business. We're going to reduce call time at the call center. And then in the other, we're going to be more proactive with our machine maintenance instead of reactive. So huge impacts to the business. But we started with the use case. And then the second piece was following up with how can we leverage AI? And in both cases, AI needs to have good quality data as an input to have good quality outputs. It's the same slogan that we've heard for years and years: good data in, good data out, bad data in, bad data out. So it's the same with AI. So there's still a data initiative to clean up and make sure that we have the right semantic layer in place to feed into the AI, but then the AI will help accelerate us getting to a meaningful output versus spending weeks or months trying to build that from scratch.
Absolutely. I guess when we're talking about teams, we need a team to deliver. Especially at a startup level, you're going to need a team, and sometimes you might be the only data person there. Maybe there's a vision of hiring more data people. But when you are in a situation where you're at a new team, whether it's a startup or not, and you are looking to establish that team, you obviously need to have some type of idea of who you're going to hire, how you're going to set that team up. Obviously, it's probably dependent on requirements in each company, but there is a lot of discussion around, do you hire a generalist? Do you hire a specialist? How you kind of break up that skill. You handle both data and data science. When you are looking at this discussion of hiring, do you ideally target generalists early on, or do you look at people that can actually come in and do specific things that maybe are more expertise oriented?
So I tend to lean more generalist in the beginning, and then move into specialist. But even within the generalist category, there's a couple of different buckets. So I think of the data and analytics as a spectrum, and it's got three big pieces. So you have a data bucket, you have an analytics bucket, and then you have a third bucket, a data science bucket. And within each of those three skill sets, you get more specific. So even just within the world of data, you get into data engineers, analytics engineers, and BI developers. And so to start, instead of hiring a specific data role, it might be someone who is able to wear multiple hats across the data spectrum. They do have more of a specialty. Folks tend to lean into one or two areas. But someone who has that personality trait where they're comfortable working outside their sandbox and trying something new, taking on a new skill set, you can throw an ambiguous problem at them and they'll figure it out. They can be kind of scrappy and hold things together with duct tape where needed. Similarly, in the analytics bucket, you break down into more specializations. Do you lean more towards the business stakeholder management, more into experimentation, statistics? Do you lean into some of the machine learning capabilities? Same thing on the data science side. You can lean more data science, more AI. But I think to start, it's that personality trait of I'm okay to wear multiple hats. That I think is really key. It's just whether that sits more in the larger buckets of data analytics or data science, depending on the business needs.
Absolutely. I mean, as you are growing, your needs will change. Getting the business stakeholders to understand the necessary investment in data. When you look at that and and I mean, this could be again at any size company, but when you look at that conversation that we need more investment in data to deliver more, that's, I guess, again, going back to software engineering data, I think it's a little bit more challenging sometimes in data because it's not as easy to look, touch, feel versus the progress you could potentially show in a feature being developed. But to lobby for those extra dollars, I mean, I was going to ask you what works. I mean, that's maybe a difficult one, but how do you take that approach? What's the approach to helping move the needle on going, we do need more investment in data, and here's why?
My preference is always, and I've been fortunate in that my experience has also been, it's usually a pull from the business versus a push from me. And so it's typically the business advocating and saying, we want more resources. And it's coming from a use case of, we want to be able to do XYZ with the information. We want to be able to have these insights. We want to be able to have this self-service capability. But whatever those like data assets are, the outputs of the team that we don't have capacity to do is usually what facilitates those conversations of adding additional resources. Then the conversation becomes what resources need to be added. That's where I offer a recommendation of, well, if this is what we're trying to achieve, then this is the role or roles that I'd recommend we bring on, whether it's a generalist or a specialist and where they fit into that spectrum. Some businesses at the very top, we want to have support on the data and analytics team more broadly to support the enterprise. At other companies I've worked at, it's been more department specific. And so starting with departments that are already bought into using data and analytics and delivering value there. And then as other teams see the power and the impact that we can have in the organization, they say, well, hold on, what about me too? And that's where we try to shift capacity where possible. I tend to operate with leaner teams as opposed to overstaffing. And so I like taking on a little bit more than maybe we're staffed for to try and move the needle and prove out the opportunity to say, yes, I think that there is something here. Now let's talk about bringing on some full-time headcount to support this in a bigger way. But it's that same idea of like, how do you MVP something before you just go all in?
Are you seeing, I mean, on the software engineering side, there's a lot of tools that are coming out to help people code, I'd use the word faster in this case, but it was just faster, or at least help produce more code for them. On the data side, are you seeing any of those tools? Are you able to leverage any of those tools? What do you see in that environment that would potentially help with fitting into this discussion of delivering faster or having more capabilities without adding headcount?
I think that the Gemini ChatGPT of the world are great for brainstorming and ideating. I don't think it fully replaces this idea of having a cohesive team of data and analytics professionals that can bounce ideas off of each other and brainstorm, but it does help to augment that. And I think democratize it across the business where less technical users can have a conversation about, well, how would I approach this problem? And let's brainstorm some ideas of where I might be able to go with this. I think that's like a great first start. The other use case that we're starting to pilot and look into is how can we really revolutionize self-service data? So dashboards have always been the traditional route for making data accessible across the business. How can we think about generative AI as being that interface and meeting end users where they're at? So we use Slack for our internal communications. How can we have Slack be the UI and then have AI on the back end of that connected to a clean semantic layer in our data warehouse with the right roles and permissions and data access to then be able to open up the opportunity to have a conversation about what were our sales like last week and where did we miss our target numbers and why did we miss our target numbers? What's something that I could do differently next week to make sure that I exceed my targets? But starting to ask not only what questions, but why, and having that conversation. Now, we'll need to make sure that we put the right parameters in place so that we tell the robot, for example, don't lie to your end users if you don't know, be honest about it. So there is going to be some learning pains as we go down this path, but I think there's an opportunity to really make self-service look different in a way that would empower the business above and beyond what we've been able to do historically.
And I guess maybe a question there. When you are looking at that, you know, I guess end users have traditionally been very comfortable with, or not comfortable, they're just used to the way reporting and analytics have been delivered in the past. We're also getting used to the way some of these, you know, popular chat solutions are working. You know, you put in a question, it spits out a bunch of information, and we refine that. And you mentioned even going within Slack. I guess that would almost be shifting the UI, the change management of getting people to adopt more by giving up maybe some of what they have traditionally been comfortable with data, or at least known with data. I guess when you look at some of those solutions and saying, hey, we are going to shift, we're going to provide like a single answer, a single response. Is that going to be, I mean, given what we're seeing just in AI, is that going to be a big, you know, small, medium-sized jump in terms of change management for your stakeholders?
I think medium-sized. I think there are known challenges to using existing traditional BI tools. And so I think it will be a welcome change from the majority of end users to have an interface that's easier to use and more accessible and meets them where they're at. It's a change that's really more to make it easier. I think data should be, I mean, that's such a key word. It has to be easy for folks to adopt it across the business. Otherwise, I mean, making their life harder, that's not our role, right? Our job is to help empower, enable, accelerate, help them be more efficient, more effective. And part of that is meeting them where they're at. And I feel like AI is giving us a totally new tool to be able to do that. I'm also an advocate that there can be multiple ways to access information and that's okay, as long as it's all coming from the same single source of truth so that the number you get and the number I get match. That's key. But if we keep a traditional BI tool and we have more of a generative AI interface, comfortable with that. And I mean, it'd be great to open up our database to folks that are more technical that want to go in and ad hoc query. No problem. So it's letting people have multiple avenues to access information as long as it all comes back to the same original single source of truth.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you mentioned having multiple ways, and I do think we have spent so much time delivering solutions in a certain way. Obviously, that's going to require some shift in how. And the question that maybe comes up when we look at that, the question that I ask sometimes data professionals is, there's always a question of making sure the data is right, and obviously, when users have more data points and we're trying to expand those capabilities and we're trying to go via Slack or similar solution, how do we still keep the confidence in the data being correct, the responses being correct, if we're giving them less of it potentially? I guess there's different scenarios, but in this particular question would be, when we're giving them maybe less data, they have to trust and believe it more. Is that education? Is that just repetition? Is it a case of data on the data side? We need to do better and ensure that the product is even more dialed in before it gets into the hand of the users?
So, yes, I'd say there's a responsibility from the data team to make sure that what we do bring to the table is as trustworthy and reliable as it can be. However, things change is constant. Something will change somewhere in the data pipelines that will trickle down. As much as we will put checks and balances and controls in place, something will sneak through at some point. And so I always make sure to have conversations between both stakeholders, so the business end users, and the data team, and express the fact that it is a shared responsibility. It's like when you're walking through the airport and when you see something, say something. Same thing. In data, when you see something, say something. Like, bring it to our attention and let us know when something looks weird. Sometimes it's an education of user error. We were looking at it wrong. The definition wasn't clear. Great, let's do better documentation. Other times, there's something that broke in our data pipelines, and knowing about it is the first step to being able to fix it. And so having that shared responsibility, I think, is key, but making sure that those moments are few and far between. Otherwise, the trust in the data gets completely broken. And that's hard. So that's that initial, there needs to be sort of like a solid foundation to the reliability of the data. But that last 20%, that's where I think it's a shared responsibility.
I love it, Laura. I think lots of great nuggets of insight here. And I guess maybe final question. When we are building a new data team and we are looking down the road for growth, and obviously we want to expand capabilities, how much of your time, I guess, as the head of data, or maybe somebody on your team, but how much of your time can you devote to looking at some of these more advanced solutions, right? Like, somebody's got to test them, play with them, get comfortable with them, evaluate them, all those things. And that takes time. Yeah. Where we're always saying we're under-resourced or we're up against the gun delivering. Like, how do you manage to fit that in? Do you include that as part of your plan? Is it you just take time outside of work, in addition to work? How do you cope with that?
It is hard. Time is a limited resource, and I find that is often the biggest challenge, to being able to stay up to date with new technologies, to dive into AI, right, which is the latest and greatest new technology, to learn a new skill. So all of those challenges come back to needing time. And so I've typically built this idea of innovation into my performance review competency matrix. So I set it as an expectation that this is part of the job, is thinking about new ideas and new solutions. And sometimes it's staying up to date with external technologies. Sometimes it's understanding how we do things today with our current tech stack, but getting deeper with the technology because we should be using it differently to its fullest capability. And so I think that helps to set the expectation both above and below in my organization, so that people realize how important innovation is, and doing things differently and coming up with ideas is to a data and analytics organization.
Fantastic. If somebody wants to reach out for a follow-up question, is there a good way of connecting with you? Is there a good way of asking you something?
Absolutely. DM me on LinkedIn. I'd love to chat.
Okay. I love it. Laura, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing. I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode. I'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I thought, we talked about building net new data capabilities, about hiring, dealing with stakeholders, that roadmap, short-term, long-term, medium-term, managing budget, asking for more, type of people to hire. We covered a lot of ground here. Laura was fantastic in her time and sharing. So please share this episode with somebody else who could also benefit from it, who might enjoy the conversation. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.